just in case they don't.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting of March 10th, our Finance and Warrant Commission Subcommittee reports to order. I grant permission to Westwood Media Center to record the meeting. Does anybody else want to record the meeting? Nope. Also, there are other individual assistant hearing devices available. If anybody wants one, where are they available? In the corner?
Connor has
Connor. If anybody wants one. And so now we will have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yep. Tonight, we have one member who is participating remotely. It's not Howard, it's George. And so we have to do an out loud roll call, which Jane will now do.
Barb Delisle,
Here?
Peter Lentz,
Here.
Bill Bruce,
Here.
Cindy Buckley,
Here.
Jim Ferraro,
Here.
Lauren Fitzpatrick,
Here.
George Hertz. Here. Thank you, George. Angela Hughes,
Here.
Peter Ittig,
Here.
Tom Kilgariff,
Here.
Diane McCarthy,
Here.
Howard Messing,
Here.
Chris Pareda,
Here.
Mike Powers.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, so if the municipal subcommittee, the way we're doing this because we are live streaming, I guess, for the television, is the subcommittee is going to sit up at the table up here and do their presentation from the table. So municipal subcommittee will come up. And just for members, instead, on this one, because it's all these distinct budgets they're discussing, we can, Howard has said, we can interrupt and ask questions as we go along for this one. But when we do the schools, since it's the schools, we'll wait until the end on that one. Anyway,
All set?
all set. Thank you, Howard.
So the municipal subcommittee is charged with it's charged with reviewing the budget of the town excluding the schools. And we had a subcommittee of myself and Tom Kilgariff, Cindy Buckley, Caitlin Gerzak, and Angela Hughes. We conducted a bunch of in-person meetings and on the phone meetings, submitted some questions, and had a chance to look over the budget, had some conferences and reviewed it. We attempted to make sure we understood how the budget's going to help the department achieve its goals. So I think you'll see a lot of attempts in here to do a little review of what happened in the past, but more importantly, what the overall goals are coming up for the future. We looked at various metrics, compared the budgets with previous years, and made sure that things were in line with what we thought was reasonable. I will say, overall, I think the budget is, I'll say it again at the end, I think the budget was well done as usual. It is a relatively quiet year, especially on the capital side, as compared to other years. I don't think there's much controversy, but certainly we're happy to listen to any questions that anybody might have if they think we slipped. So the budget is 21 and a half or so $1 million, which is a 3.58% increase, similar to the increases we've seen in the past. It is overwhelmingly salaries, and in fact, this year is a slight shift more towards salaries than in the past. And as we go through the various departments, I think you'll see that the level of staffing in the town is pretty much constant. So that 222, that is again excluding the schools. There's a little pie chart showing how that's split up, which, by the way, I enjoyed because I learned how to do a pie chart for the first time. Anyway, so you see the bulk of the money that is spent is on public safety, fire and police. And beyond that, the breakdown here is 20% for public works, 16% for library and recreation, and 13% community economic development, general government, and 6% for community economic development. General government is everything other than what's on the other pieces of that, by the way. So we'll get in a little more detail on that as we move
Just
on.
on the library recreation, and you say all others, is that like council on aging and, youth and family services and that
I
sort
have to
of?
look at exactly what's in there.
But there are other,
there are a few
it's
others.
not just the library and rec, okay.
Actually, no, I think that is just the library
Okay.
and rec. Well, the rest of that's in general government.
Okay.
These are the changes. You see, I said it's sliding a little bit more towards salary. That doesn't show up in the percent because it's so much bigger than the overall expenses. So in absolute terms, the salary expense has grown quite a bit. Much of that is due towards mandatory increases, things that we really don't have much control over. And by that, I mean contracts, particularly with cost of living increases and so forth. We also, this past year, I think Cindy may mention it also, the teen librarian became a full-time position. That increased things. And there have been some upgrades in the past. Last year, people got promoted. That reflected itself in the salaries. The expense side of the thing, as has been the case in the past few years, really building maintenance and inspection has gone up. With the addition of the library a few years ago and the firehouse and the police station, we've seen the actual expenses associated with those buildings go up. They are bigger than they were. And on the other hand, I will say a great effort in the town on the energy side of things. One thing I think we all talked about was how important it is for the town to recognize the importance of keeping our energy costs down and to set a standard and model for the rest of the town. And I'm pretty pleased with the seriousness with everyone I talk to takes that particular task. Police department. Talked with the police chief, who is, I think, appropriately very proud of his department and the work that they've done. I think we have a department that really represents us well. As an aside, I had a out-of-country visitor that I met with today who unfortunately had some money stolen out of their wallet in the hotel over in University. And without knowing anything about what I do, told me how impressed they were, not only with the police station when they filed a report, but the friendliness of the people who helped them and the empathy they got there. So that was good. Chief, thank you for that. Anyway, these are some of the things that the police department has accomplished in the past. We talked a long time with the chief about diversity amongst the police staff. It's a tough thing to accomplish. The pool of applicants is in high demand for a diversity thing, yet we've made some progress. I think we're going to continue to make some emphasis on that moving forward to make sure that our police staff has a better representation than it has in the past. We maintained high visibility. I know I see the police around a lot. I'm sure all of you do, particularly over in University Station. I think it's important to have the staff, the police represented. Modernize the in-vehicle systems. The police car of old is very different than what it is today. It's very high-tech inside there. I didn't ask the question of how much the equipment cost relative to the car itself, but I would bet it's approaching the amount of the car itself. We spend a lot of time with the schools. And we also talked a little bit about what the town continues to do to worry about emergency incidents that might happen. And there's some specific training that's been done, and the police really take a lot of involvement with that. For next year, the chief talked about, and we looked at, getting statewide accreditation. I asked why that's important to us. To some extent, it's just a little label that you put on it, but it really does mean that we're holding up a standard for the police that would be recognized elsewhere. It's an extra measure of our belief in how well our police are doing, and it's not that onerous a thing for the town to do. So we're going to begin working towards that. The administrative fleet has plans are to make that 100% hybrids. Again, I talked about energy before. That's a big part of what's going on. And I think we're going to start using some hybrid patrol vehicles. And I put Tesla next question mark because the police chief actually has talked about that and talked to the Tesla people. I don't think that's on the plan for the next budget year. But I think Elon Musk is interested in what he can do with that. Certainly for chases, how fast those cars go might be a
Can
good
sneak
thing.
up on people.
Yeah. Regional relationships, of course, we're one town inside of many, and we need to make sure that we have good relations with other towns. God forbid we do have an incident that's going to be in the need to have people here, and even on a more regular basis. It's important to strengthen those. Targeted community policing and filling vacancies should keep us busy for the next year. I thought it would be interesting to look at some of the figures that I pulled out from the police report. 2018 was the last year we had complete figures for, and I compared it to 2013. And to put that in perspective, if you look at the growth in this, it's pretty amazing. We have not doubled the staff of the police station, but many of these areas have gone up quite significantly. And it's representative of the work that's been taken. A lot of this is due, of course, to Westwood Station, which has been a theme for our discussions for a long time now. I was going to make a joke about coronavirus, but I guess that's not. So particularly, if you notice here, the number of calls has gone up dramatically. One of the things I mentioned, I had a guest who was very impressed with the police station. She particularly was impressed by the dispatch area that she could see through the window. And when you look at the calls that are responded to, I think that's indicative of why that has been so important to us to get that done. Okay. Notice, by the way, that citations are up. I will say that varies greatly from year to year. I'm not sure that is really indicative of actual growth. They're not stopping our citizens more often than they had been. It's just in particular, the chief also said that when we hire new policemen in the first year or two, they tend to issue a lot of citations. So I think that might have something to do with that. All right, getting into the actual budget. The budget for the police department is a modest 2.3% increase from last year. The number of staff is staying the same. I think this is the first year we haven't grown the staff in a number of years, and that growth was again due to University Station for the moment. I mentioned that dispatch, remembering that this isn't just for the police department. Dispatch handles the fire department, and in fact, I didn't ask the question, but I think that there may be more calls related to EMS and fire than there are to the police. It's certainly certainly a large amount of that. The overtime forecast, I think both having more officers and also just getting a better handle on what overtime we have has created a situation where we're better able to forecast the opening. And again, I want to reemphasize that operating costs are the least of the money we spend on the police department. It's really mostly salaries. Capital for the year would be $317,000, which is the standard replacement of vehicles. We're on a rotating schedule that we replace those vehicles. The radio infrastructure is in need of some upgrades and just general police equipment. Okay, any questions about the police department?
If I may, you talk about arrests going up. What type of crimes are we looking at? Did you break it out into violent, non-violent, or?
Well, I didn't, actually, they do have, if you want to look at those figures, they are available. I didn't include them because they're so insignificant in terms of numbers that I didn't think there's any meaningful comparison between 2013 and 2018. The number of murders has not gone up.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, so I think those figures are available. And again, they're all relatively small numbers.
The numbers or the crimes, I mean, the types of crimes.
Yeah, the biggest increase I noticed was basically, I'll call it retail theft, larceny theft, which I think is due to Westwood Station. And I assume we get a lot more calls on shoplifting than we used to and things of that nature. I didn't see, and again, figures are here, I didn't see any big increase in violent crimes. Chief, want to say anything about that?
Yeah, the violent crimes, the so-called rape, robbery, homicide, the part one, you may have heard that referred to by the old FBI standard, uniform crime reporting. We continue to enjoy an exceedingly low rate of violent crime. So violent crime is very, very low to begin with, and there's a slight reduction in it, but the numbers are so low. I mean, you're talking about something going from a 2 to a 1, or very low numbers. So the significant increase in calls for service as relates to criminal activity tends to be not only retail theft by way of shoplifting, but credit card theft, organized rings of identity fraud and so forth, organized theft rings concentrated almost entirely at University Station. So that's, I would say, the single biggest category increase. There is more traffic. Some of those citations, the citations would be higher. It's true that the newer officers tend to write more citations, but the citations are higher just because we have more traffic and more people, so more car accidents and things of that nature. But that would be the single biggest component of crime increase. Would be things related to the University Station, commercial theft and the like.
Thank you.
Do you get much support from the stores there? Do they have their own asset protection programs and, you know?
So some do, Wegmans and Target do. We get varying degrees of support. So some stores take the position that they would rather write off that retail theft or shrinkage, as it were, as a cost of doing business. Some have outright said they don't even want to call us and they don't want us there because they think it's bad for business. We've had some lengthy conversations about the responsibility they have in doing business in towns.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I'm unplugged over here. That's good. Like Tony Bennett. Yeah, we've had some lengthy conversations about the importance and the responsibility of businesses to communicate with the police department, because those people that commit crimes in their store, while they may have no interest in them, certainly we as a community have an interest in them, because they're not singular store thieves. They go to other stores to commit crimes. These people are often wanted in other states. In fact, we've traveled all over the country, actually, to catch some of these people that have committed crimes here in Westwood and brought them back to Westwood just so that they can face justice and we can get some modicum of restorative justice for the victims, not only the stores, but the individual people.
Okay. All right. Tom spent some time looking at the fire department. He's going to present that to us.
So on the fire side, the budget had a 3.6% increase from the prior year. Broken down, that was 2.1% in operating expenses and 3.7% in salaries, which was driven by, as Howard touched on earlier, contractual changes in apparatus, new technology, and some updates in training curriculum. The full-time staff, I think it's interesting to note that it's increased from 35 full-time employees in 2015 to 45 in fiscal year 21, obviously driven by the University Station impact. A few bullet points on continuing developments. Hiring and training continues to be obviously a focus. They hired and trained 7 new firefighter paramedics in fiscal year 20, which is great. Also furthering education by some members of the team with associate and bachelor degrees in fire science. Also great to see. Peak level staffing, a quick note on this, and this has been I think one of Chief Decker's focal points since he's been here in Westwood, and it should be noted that his peak level staffing model has had resulted in a reduction of staff recalls and overtime expense. So a staff recall happens when at some point during a shift there's a need to bring in additional off-duty members of the department, and in so doing they're guaranteed a certain number of hours of pay, even if that need doesn't use that full need of those hours. So, I think Chief, and certainly Chief can fill in some gaps here, but the whole staffing is almost like a puzzle that needs to be put together to obviously allow the department to service the town, but also to do it in an efficient way in terms of employee expense. So one of the numbers that Chief was able to provide in that his peak level staffing resulted in a savings of over 1,800 hours of recall time, which then resulted in a savings of over about $104,000 in terms of actual salary expense. So that balance of staffing and scheduling is very critical, and Chief has done a real nice job with all of that stuff, and so we're seeing the benefits of it. A couple of other bullet points: the Adopt a Hydrant program for winter and shoveling out. Obviously, it was a light year, snow-wise, but in our conversation with the chief, we still have a long way to go with that program. The chief and his folks have been using social media to increase the exposure of that program, and hopefully that really catches on. Station 1 needs replacing, no surprise there. A couple of other metrics and updates. In terms of the impact of University Station and where we're at with that, the total incident runs for EMS and fire dropped 8% in fiscal year 19 from 18. So from about just over 3,100 calls to 3,400 calls to 3,100 calls, an 8% drop. From 18 to 19, EMS calls increased 3%, but all other calls decreased 15% during that time. In our conversation with Chief, he indicated that further spikes in incident runs will probably happen as more buildings come online at University Station, but the hope is to see a plateau as building is complete. On the capital side, typical year, equipment, technology, and that type of thing. So nothing out of the ordinary there. Your typical stuff. And that's it on fire.
Anybody have anything? On the, you comment on Station 1, we did commit capital last year to the budget to kind of stave off any collapse in the station, and how's that going? And I'm looking kind of beyond you to Chief Deckers, too.
Oh, I
in case-
was banking on that.
Yeah, yeah, he's smiling, waiting for you to answer.
So basically, we've done a study, and we did find that we're still having more issues with the building, but working with the budget from last year, we're adding and making some changes. So we've shifted one of the heavier trucks off that floor. We've moved one of the fire engines off the floor, parked that in the basement now. So we're making those changes so that we can still utilize the building to its fullest capacity until we can make permanent changes and upgrades to the building, which is going to be rather expensive, so we have to really plan that out.
Yeah, okay. Anything else? Chris?
I just want to emphasize that is in my mind, that's a huge municipal priority and should be highlighted in neon and capital letters. We need to replace Fire Station 1.
It's not in this year's budget, though.
No.
Well, not
Right.
proposed, no.
Right.
Okay.
I have a question
Yes.
about the fire department has there's a comment about ambulance receipts. I wonder what it costs a person who calls an ambulance.
$1,600 or so.
how many?
The charge is $1,600 or so.
$1,600.
I know that because I had
Wow.
reason to use an ambulance in December. There's a per mile charge in there too. Well,
Which is usually covered by insurance, so,
Right.
to some extent. Yeah. Go ahead.
If you want, I'll comment a little bit more on that. Just, it changes depending upon the level of service, okay, that you require us to do. So if it's a basic life support, you'll hear BLS, that's a different price. If it's an ALS, Advanced Life Support 1, it's a certain level, there's a set price. And then there's also another price for different things that go along with it. However, depending upon if you were having a cardiac event and we had to push a bunch of drugs and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't come close to touching the cost of what it actually costs us, because we can't bill or recover exactly what we're charging. Our rates are set, and they're set by industry standard, and also what we can maximize to get the insurance. And then the insurance only covers a certain amount, so depending upon what you have, your insurance company will cover it, and then you're billed for the balance. So that's how the system works currently when we do that. So it could be very expensive. Some people could pay upwards to $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000, depending upon the transport and what goes on.
My bill, which was, I assume, the least level of service, was about $1,600, of which my insurance covered $900 of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the fire department or Tom? All right. Public Works. As a reminder, the sewer is actually funded out of sewer receipts. So the revenue that comes differently. So anyway. Also, I'm not going to talk here about recycling because when I get to fixed costs, I'll talk about the issues that we have with recycling, which are quite important. Anyway, Department of Public Works. Key accomplishment, again, a fairly routine year. No major projects initiated, no major projects completed. The DPW might feel differently about that, but from my point of view.
Don't see them
Oh.
here. Don't see them here, so you're okay.
All right, so I'm okay. Route 109 sidewalk enhancements, the Clappertree and Winterseed intersection, various paving projects, the cemetery with the irrigation at the columbarium. I like saying that. And also, I don't know if anyone's noticed, I noticed it looks very much nicer now on the entrance to the cemetery. And the sewer, I really don't know what SCADA stands for, I'm sorry, but it seems like every year there's some issue that has to be dealt with, upgraded to keep our sewer up to date, and most of us really want to have a good sewer. So, we are hooked up with the MRWA, and they, in fact, charge us an assessment to be hooked up with them and use their services this year, and that's a major expense for the town, down by $27,000. I think that's the first time in the last few years it's gone down. Their overall budget is rising by about 4%. Again, salaries being the biggest component of that. No new staff this year. I think we're finally getting to the point where we'll see the growth in the custodian electrical costs in the new buildings level off. If you remember last year, we switched from a service to doing it ourselves, and that changed some categories in the budget. This is the first full year where we'll have done it all ourselves. Snow and ice, we took a major jump last year, I believe, in how much we budgeted for snow and ice. This is level funded. I didn't check with Pam where we are this year, but anecdotally, it probably seems like we're below the 450 that we forecast. And again, as a reminder, the snow and ice is the one item in the budget that we're allowed to borrow against the future for. Everything else has to be paid for within the year. Not that that's going to be an issue this year, but in general, if we do exceed it, we're not stuck out in the cold, so to speak. A lot of efforts on energy savings in the various buildings. And one other unique thing about the town, I don't know if it's unique, but uncommon, is that we don't actually have a town engineer. The DPW has felt for the last few years after the position was vacated that it would be better simply to hire an engineer on an as-needed basis rather than have one around. And there's a pros and cons with that. And again, really just from a budgetary point of view, it mostly affects where in the budget the dollars that we spend for engineering services fall. I just remarked that because again, that's something I noticed was a little bit different. Capital, similar to the police station, we go regularly on, but on a rotating basis, upgrade, trade in the old equipment, get the new equipment. That's what's being done this year. And again, there's something being done in the sewer for the pump station. Any questions about DPW or sewer? For culture and recreation, Cindy took a look at that, and she'll give us what she knows about it.
So I did write some things down, so if you'll indulge me. The FY '21 proposed budget for the library is $1.48 million. That's a 3.8% increase over last year. Salaries are increasing 4.77%, due mostly to the first full year of the teen librarian being on board. She was hired in September of 2019. The library is seeing an increase in downloaded material being borrowed, which is resulting in a decrease in the books line item and an increase to the audio-visual line item, but it's netting out to be the same. This may also be contributing to fewer people visiting the library. The door count was down 1%. Capital requests include a patron staff end user technology, just patron staff end user technology, and 2 self-checkout terminals that will either supplement the 2 that were purchased last year at this location or will move to the Islington branch once it's open. As the library has evolved into a true community center and meets the needs of everyone in Westwood, they continue to refine services and programs. Adding a teen librarian was a result of the middle schoolers needing a place to spread their wings on short Wednesdays. Additionally, as more patrons look for downloadable material, the library will allocate more resources to audiovisual materials, and as more people for whom English is a second language look to take advantage of what the library has to offer, the library is responding by looking for more materials in world languages. And I just wanted to make a note regarding staffing, salaries, and unintended consequences. In FY 2014, when the new library opened, the salaries in the library were $851,000. Salaries for FY '21 are budgeted at $1.16 million, averaging at about 4.5% increase a year. This can be attributed to a number of things, but needing more employees to safely staff the building. It turned out that each floor needs 2 people to cover it for safety reasons and patron satisfaction. And I just think it was something to keep in mind as we often talk about unintended consequences as a group. That's one of the things that maybe hadn't been thought about. Any questions? That's it for the library. No? Okay. On to the rec department. So the FY '21 proposed budget for the rec department is $488,000. It's a 1.6% decrease from last year, mainly due to turnover resulting in lower step levels for new staff. As minimum wage increases are being phased in, minimum wage this year is now $12.50 an hour. The rec department relies heavily on part-time minimum wage staff to deliver their summer programs and feels in order to stay competitive, it will be important to continue to offer the minimum wage. So as this continues to rise each year to meet the new state minimum, it's going to be important to keep up with that. A robust revolving fund continues to allow for reinvestment in community recreation assets such as court refinishing and pool maintenance. And I did write about the Thurston Field lighting. The recreation department is maintaining that lighting the fields at Thurston will help alleviate the field issue for the spring and fall sports seasons. It will not solve the lack of field issues in town, which explains the design work request for 242 Nahanton Street. It's no longer being referred to as the church land or the First Parish land. Should this project move forward, the lights would not likely be turned on until the fall of 2021, and the Westwood Lodge field is going to come back online before that. So the department did want me to point out that several groups are being turned away each year as they inquire about field rentals. So we're not hosting tournaments, or outside fundraising groups can't use our fields to host those events.
Did they comment about any like in-town programs that can't be run? I mean,
Nothing in town, they can accommodate, just barely accommodate everybody that has the requests, in town. People would like for more time, but everyone, and the, lacrosse teams and soccer teams are starting to maybe train by age group instead of each individual team, you know, one night a week or whatever, they'll have to train all together to be able to accommodate. People leave every year upset. They wish there was more field space, but we just don't have it.
yes.
Regarding the lights in the field, has there been any discussion about West Nile virus and Triple E, which are predominant in the fall months? I think last year some of the football games were canceled on Friday nights to host on Saturdays.
So we didn't talk about Triple E or West Nile as a, per se. But my question was, you know, the fields are wet for so long in the spring, and so stuff doesn't open for such a long time, that then it's light out later and you might not need the lights. And then in the fall, your season is abbreviated due to the cold weather anyway, and so then you might not need the lights. I think we're probably really only looking at using those lights, like really, really needing to use those lights, maybe 2 or 3 months out of the year. Like, because I don't understand, and that's just my opinion.
So does it justify the cost?
That's for you all to decide.
We can have lots of discussions at our next meeting.
I'm sure
about
that,
it.
yeah, there'll be a lot of discussions about that, but
Cindy, could I mention one thing on the Thurston Field? In some of my conversations with some of the Babe Ruth folks, they would, if there was lighting at that field, then that would open up some evening games or nighttime games, baseball throughout the summer, spring and summer.
But they're
and
not
fall.
baseball fields. They're going to be soccer fields.
Would the lighting not also light up the baseball field too?
I think it's just the 2 fields in the back
I'm
of the
seeing the
Thurston.
back row going, no.
It's just the 2 fields at
No,
the
it's
Thurston.
just 2 soccer fields, it's not a baseball field.
Oh.
They're on opposite ends of that field, if
Right.
you're familiar with the layout.
Yeah.
Is it not possible to include the baseball field?
The way it's been designed, the lighting would not allow for baseball.
I'm sorry, could you identify yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Rich Adams, I'm the interim director of the
Okay,
Recreation.
and that wasn't going to be one of my questions, is what are we doing about the interim director? Okay, good, welcome.
Right, thank you. So, the field, the design is to like just the 2 soccer fields. It doesn't have any consideration for the baseball field, which is on the opposite end of the field, down by Manhattan Street. These are closer to where First Baptist Church is on the other side of that tree line, behind the Thurston School.
Is there a reason why the baseball field wouldn't also be lit? Baseball and/or softball?
Maybe it's too far away.
It wasn't part of the scope of the project. It was really looking to solve the problem we have not enough field space and demand for nighttime play for the soccer and lacrosse programs that run on those fields. We have not received any requests for this from the baseball programs.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Cindy? Next, we'll talk about general government. So a list of the departments there. Don't mean to slight any of the departments by lumping them all together. But the reason we do that is the overall budget is a bit smaller in comparison. And also, for the most part, these departments, I don't want to say they don't change from year to year, but their activities don't change much from year to year. There's not as much discussion around what they do. So the proposed budget is an increase 4.2% to $2.8 million, $2.9 million. The biggest increases are in software licensing and legal costs. software is ending up being, more and more of what the town does is controlled by software, as opposed to consumer software, which is mostly free or relatively inexpensive. Commercial software tends to be higher priced, and the software industry has been changing over the last few years from a license purchase to a license rental mode. That also is designed to increase the revenue that software companies get. I know a lot about that. So that's one thing. And legal costs, it's almost the same answer there. Legal costs don't necessarily imply that the town is in more trouble. Doesn't mean we're being sued a whole lot more. It's just that the governance of the town continues to become more and more complex. There's more and more regulations that have to be interpreted. As we know from these meetings, we often have to call upon legal counsel present to explain to us something that's going on. Well, that happens in the day-to-day operation of the town. Some of that is fixed costs, some of that we have to go out and get legal costs from the outside. So that's why there's an increase there. Prior year's accomplishments, implementation of early voting. I voted early and regretted it, but, but on the other hand, it's a nice convenience to have.
That thing's on, Howard.
It's all right. I'm sure there's others who feel the way I do. We moved the permitting process online. There continues to be permits for stuff going on at University Station. University Station is not quite full up yet. Assume it will be over the next year or two. We know there's been a lot of emphasis on worrying about housing. This year is the census year, and the all-important figure of low-income housing in the town is going to be decided. And so there's a lot of work to make sure that we continue to meet the goals that we need for that. And there is, ongoing, we have a comprehensive plan that we pay a lot of attention to. Next year, we'll be finishing up the Wentworth Hall over in Islington. And the construction over there has been, I think, a good thing for the town. There's always, as we know, there's been some controversy about it. In terms of getting that done, I think that residents of that part of town will be very happy when they see what happens with Wentworth Hall and how it's redone. There was a study done over the last year or two on security in town. We all know what was in the news. We want to make sure that we're as prepared as we can be, that the improvements in the town are here to protect all of us. The schools were the first to receive the benefits of that. This year, we're going to hope to implement some of those recommendations. I don't think there's anything terribly expensive, but on the other hand, it's something that has to be done. And as I mentioned, housing efforts there. Fixed costs are things we have to pay for that don't really have much discretion on our part. And on top of everything else we do, having to do with things like healthcare costs for employees, pensions, and so forth. We expect an increase of 6.7% this year to 16.9 million. The pension assessment increase of 7% to 5.8 million. Seems like a lot, but it's not out of line with what others are seeing. Fortunately, that we can afford to take care of the people who are retiring from the town or who will retire, but those costs will continue to rise. The 5% on health insurance, again, obviously 5% is bigger than cost of living, but compared to what other people are seeing, 5% is not necessarily a huge number. My company had a 7% this year on top of a 10% increase last year, so it's not entirely out of line. So fixed costs are split close to 50-50 between the town and the schools. The last thing I wanted to talk about here in fixed costs is the waste collection and disposal, which is rising by 10%. That reflects the problems that are going on in the recycling world. I'm sure we've all read stories about how much of what used to be recycled is now being discarded after it gets to its destination. The DPW continues to make efforts to educate the town on what can and can't be recycled, what you can and can't put in your recycling bin. And we so far are not getting much penalties from that. Other towns are seeing some penalties. Again, it's a complicated formula, and if the amount that has to be rejected rises above a certain level, then there's disproportionately increasing cost to the town for that material. Simple rule of thumb is separate, even though you put it all together in the bin, separate by material. So you don't want, if you have metal stopper on a glass bottle, take the metal off, put it in separately. Is just a rule of thumb for what to be done. Any questions on, I didn't stop for questions on general government, but any questions on general government or fixed costs?
Is that an annual contract with Waste Management?
I don't know.
No.
I don't think it is. I think it's a 5-year contract. And that this is, I don't think this is a contract year.
Okay.
But I don't know. Why don't we check on that?
Got it.
Barb,
Yes, Chris?
is any of the cost of the software increase due to efforts to try to protect the town's software systems from those that might intrude into them with malintent?
I didn't see any specific line items for that area. That's another good question to ask.
Donna's here.
Um,
Donna's here.
Yes, okay.
Oh,
Could we
okay.
pass a microphone, microphone, please?
Wait.
Okay.
Donna
Identify.
McClellan, Director of IT. We do have a cybersecurity piece in our group of software that we combine to help protect, and every year we increase it, so there is a part of that. Most of it is normal increases that we're required to pay, office licensing, and most of it is due to that increase.
Okay, thanks.
Although it's a good comment, and maybe I'll just add, the audit committee of the town should really look at that. The responsibilities of audit committees are expanding. It's not just financial risks, and that's the number one thing being added to audit committees, looking at, make sure that institutions, towns, companies, and so forth are well protected. So, again, might be something we.
Related questions.
Yes.
I'm interested in the security issue as well. I wonder if the town has backups in the event that some town employee downloads some ransomware onto the town's computer system. Is anyone able to speak to that?
We back up every server as well as every file online, as well as on-premise. The online capability also includes disaster recovery, where we could spin up the servers in the cloud if all of our servers on-premise were impacted. We have node-level security where no employee, no user can actually install anything on any machine without us approving that action, which
And
makes it
all your
difficult.
employees are nodding yes, they know that.
Yeah,
so-
they do know that because they're stopped, and then we get an email saying those people are attempting to install something that's not allowed. So we are putting those pieces in place. And we do speak to the audit committee every year, and they interview us, and the auditors as well are, for the last at least 3 to 4, if not 5 years, we've had individual discussions with them.
Are town employees required to use two-factor authentication?
To some, in some applications, it depends upon what the application is. That's required for all remote access into any application if people are accessing remotely.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think that's about it. Oh, no, that's right. I just want to briefly talk about OPEB.
OPEB, yes. Is Peter
which-
gonna,
I can
Sorry.
talk to it if that's,
either one.
You were going to talk to?
I was on the agenda, so.
Okay, I'll let you talk about it. I happened to look at it and spend some time looking
No,
at it.
that's
I wasn't
okay.
here.
If somebody
You can
wants to
add
do
to
it.
whatever I leave out, but I think most of you know it stands for other post-employment benefits, so those are the benefits that retirees are eligible for over and above the pension, so health and dental and vision, those types of things. You'll see an estimate of the unfunded liability, a really large number, 39.1. That is a little bit of an old number. We're imminently awaiting a new number that when we came to press, we didn't have just yet. But the balance of the trust fund, the town's done a good job to get the balance up to $10.7 million. As a frame of reference, that was $8.3 million last year. So the town is, and as you know, because we kind of approved that as a separate warrant article, at least that's the way we've been doing it, somewhere between 1.4 to 1.5 million on a yearly basis, and we're bringing that up. So the town is doing a really good thing here. There's no set obligation that the town has to set up a trust fund to offset this unfunded liability, but they're doing that such that at some point in time, if we keep doing this, if we keep funding the way we're funding, that's something that we won't have to worry about. So it's really a good thing, and applaud the select board for putting that together. And we just keep funding it every year, and eventually, when we're all off this committee, we won't have an unfunded liability.
Any questions in that area?
Is that 39.1, that's not a net amount, that's the gross amount
That
of
is
the...
a net amount, I
Oh, that
believe.
is, so
It's
that's, it'll be
it's
updated by,
unfunded portion of the liability.
okay,
So,
so,
yeah, it's a net amount.
so it's, there's kind of a lag, because that's two,
Yeah,
that's...
so that actually can go up for a while as we continue to build this up, but then eventually it'll
Okay.
start to go down all the way to zero at some point in
Okay.
time.
Any
So-
questions? Okay.
So in summary, as I stated at the beginning, it's a fairly modest year without too much, I think, controversy. The town staff really does a good job in preparing this budget. I'm always impressed by the enthusiasm that people have to share what's going on for them. We are a very metric-driven town. I'll give Pam Dukeman a lot of credit for setting the stage on that, but then it's followed in all the departments as well. And really gives us, looking at the budget, and hopefully the citizens of the town who look at the various reports, can also dig down and be able to have a good idea of what the money is being spent on. I don't think there's any deep, dark secrets in this town. So overall, we're not voting tonight. We still have to hear what the public thinks. But I think it's an appropriate budget, and look forward to continuing the discussion over the next few weeks until we have to make a final decision.
Questions, go ahead.
Questions? Yes, I have, like your comment about this being a modest year, but the town has been able to spend all of the new revenues coming in from University Station and the new tax revenue from the hotels and meals tax. And as I understand it, this budget is predicated on another 3% increase in the property tax on homes, despite Proposition 2.5 limits, which I understand are not an issue in this case. But I would be interested in whether you might have any suggestions if we wanted to get the property tax increase on homes down below 3% to perhaps 2.5%, or even perhaps 2% would be nice. If you have any such suggestions, I would be interested.
Well, I'm not saying I support that, but my suggestion, if we were ever to want to do something like that, we should early in the year tell the selectmen that that's what we want, and as they prepare the budgets, they would have to tell the departments that they want a smaller budget that year, and would probably involve some cuts that might or might not be acceptable both to this group and to the town. I don't think there's really any way that we could effectively change that short of turning the town upside down at this late stage. It really has to happen from an early planning point of view. I'm not sure if I'm being responsive to your question, but that's really the case. I mean, this budget has been prepared. I don't think there's any waste in this budget. Services have increased gradually over time. A lot of that expense from the University Station certainly was taken up in extra expenses for University Station. But the additional, yes, we have spent it. And if the Board of Selectmen wanted to set a different direction for the town, that would change the dialogue from the beginning of the year for us. And that's certainly something I think you could see if Barb wants to bring that up for a discussion for next year.
I'm not on next year.
Well,
But
whoever.
like, to the point on the hotel and meals tax, that money has not been spent. We do have when we have our discussion, our next hearing, we are discussing some capital items that spend that money. But, so that's an area that can be addressed. But, yeah, there aren't a lot of additions to staff and all. So you're really talking about, basic, raises and that sort of thing.
I will also say that the town we don't have a category for deferred maintenance, but there's an awful lot of deferred maintenance in this town. So there's a lot of things we don't spend money on that maybe we should spend money on. And if we were to cut things like maintenance even further, I think we would start seeing some big problems. So it would have to be thought about very carefully.
Could somebody give Mrs. Hyde the microphone, please?
Nancy Hyde, Chair of the Select Board. I just don't want to leave a comment out there that I think was misleading. And I'd refer people back to Pam's presentation in December. We haven't used all the university station money over the years, and we have a very detailed presentation that Pam gave, so I would ask you to look at that again. We've been very careful on spending that money, and while we're using it thoughtfully, we at some point need to use it. So I do refer you back to that. And honestly, as a member of the Select Board for as long as I've been on, I can't fathom starting a year saying, cut your staffing, cut your budgets as a need to do, because we do have a standard of services that we provide in this town. Fire, police, DPW. We all reap the benefit of having those departments properly staffed. School department, the children, the families reap benefits by having those classrooms properly staffed. We have not ever embarked on a message that says our services are higher than we can afford, let's start contracting them back. We've been very careful to be modest in our increases. I can't tell you what we put our library director through to just add the teen librarian position. It was very arduous for her to get that approved through the Select Board. So I don't think, even if we started the conversation 6 months ago about the budget, you would find us asking our departments to reduce staffing and reduce services.
Actually, to affirm what Nancy just said, remember, it's mostly salaries. It's not like we're spending this money on fancy offices for the staff. So any cut would presumably mean a cut in staffing. And we would have to decide if that level of service decrease is something we wanted.
If I may, but notwithstanding, as I understand it, the budget proposals are predicated upon a 3% increase in the tax on homes this year as last year. And last year, the increase was the maximum permitted without an override. I suspect that's the design again this year. If that is, please correct me if I said anything that is wrong.
No, I think,
Okay?
okay.
All set?
Great, thank you
All
very
right.
much. Thank you very much. Now we move on to the education. Subcommittee. So led by Diane McCarthy.
Just the one.
And company.
That over.
Yeah, nice job.
You drove the bus. I was in the back.
And thank you for all the staff that has come. Some of the staff that's staying, probably.
All right, well, this is the Education Subcommittee, Chris and Mike and I. We want to start by telling you a little bit about the process and thanking Emily, who's back there, and I'm sure we'll field any questions that come up that we can't answer, for her work with us as we reviewed this budget. The process for Emily submitting this budget begins in October and goes through February, when the school committee holds its hearing and approves the proposed budget. This process includes all the principals, the assistant superintendent, the director of student services, and the director of technology. It's reviewed by the superintendent and the director of business and finance and the administrative council. On June 30th, the superintendent presented the proposed budget to the school committee. On February 11th, the superintendent presented the proposed budget to this commission. And on February 13th, the school committee had public hearings on the proposed budget. Members of this subcommittee met with Emily Parks and with her team on February 4th, and we discussed the proposed budget and took questions at that point to her. And then members of this subcommittee have also attended most school committee meetings, and we've also attended the meetings of the school building committee. The executive summary: the budget is designed to meet the school's contractual obligations. Chris is going to go through the detailed budget, and you'll see that most of that is salary, as we talked about last time in the last presentation. Address outstanding new needs and move forward school district priorities. We're going to see some of those priorities as Chris walks through the operating budget. Some of them are to implement recommendations of the school, of the social, emotional learning, and English language arts review, to continue investment in science, technology, and engineering, including a coding class at the middle school, and to add a staff person as the Director of Safety and Security, which would be to oversee the implementation of the security audit recommendations that we just heard a little bit about. As in every year, some of the requests are deferred for future years. Some of the deferred items this year include an additional literacy support at the middle school, special ed staffing to increase the capacity of the peer program, and that's the program in the elementary school, and then add additional elementary science specialists. Those items have been deferred from this budget, so there are lots of things that the school department considers and then rules out as they think about putting together the proposed budget for this year. As I said, Chris is going to start by talking about the operating budget. This one, right there.
Thank you, Diane. As you can see, the overall proposed operating budget for the school department for fiscal year 21 is just over $48 million. That represents a 3.6% increase over the fiscal year 20 operating budget. I didn't mention this, but the school department was not unaware of the fact that year over year over year, the increases have gone up slightly. If you go back to fiscal year 18, the difference between fiscal year 18 and 19 may be 3.4, 19 to 20 is 3.5, 20 to 21 is 3.6. They're not unmindful of that, and that was part of the process that they went through. On this particular chart, you can see some numbers that jump out at you that I'll go into and explain if I can. The total salary increase was 4.5%, but you notice special education actually went down 10.8%. Well, whoa, how can that be? We'll answer that question. So as Diane said, salaries represent the largest portion of the budget. Contractual obligations drive that that portion of the budget. That's the largest driving factor. Okay, so the school department is proposing to move up 1.5 positions that deal with special education from a contract basis to an in-house basis. And that gives the school department more flexibility on how those resources can be used, and basically gets you more money, more efficiency for the dollar spent. And when you factor that in, the next slide goes into a little bit more detail. When you factor that in, you can see how the salary increase is really actually a little bit lower. Another factor that factors into the 4.5% salary increase is a change in accounting practices for lane change procedures, or the amount of money that teachers get as an increase in salary for academic advancement. In the past, that money had to be made up in the next, like the fiscal year 21 budget has to account for those increases that occurred actually for under the fiscal year 20 school year. And because of this change in accounting practices, also has to account for the anticipated increases for that particular category in fiscal year 21. So it's a double hit. Also, note that this operating budget doesn't reflect an additional $1.6 million that the town gets in federal and state aid and grants. So here's what I was talking about in terms of salary increases. We got your normal step increases, COLA, and lane changes. All that down to the subtotal, that's about a 3.8% increase in salaries over last year. And then you add into the two additional expenses for this particular budget in fiscal year 21 that are unique to fiscal year 21, and that's what gives you the 4.5% increase for salaries this year. So it's not like we're increasing salaries 4.5%. Really, it's only a 3.8% increase in salaries plus those two additional items that are unique to fiscal year 21. And all that teachers' salaries go to teach our kids, our enrolled students. So where do we find the enrollment this year? Going back to school year 2011 to 2012, you see that was the peak, 3,158 students. This year we have 3,024. Next year we're projecting around 3,000. So between this year and next year, the enrollment is pretty flat. However, the distribution across grades is where the real story lies. The elementary enrollment between now and school year 25-26 is going to see an increase from where it is today, 1,266, maybe up to 1,500. Whereas the middle and high school are going to decrease from today's 1,700 down to 1,500. But the overall level of enrollment will remain about 3,000. So overall fiscal year 21 operating budget represents a measured increase to accomplish the town's two important goals: sustain current services and move forward to meet future goals. 3.6% increase over the previous year. Like I said, it's in line with year-over-year increases for the past three budget cycles. What it does do is it adds two positions to address our strategic priorities. One, an English language arts teacher in the middle school for half of position, and a director of safety and security for the district, and that's a .4 position. So this chart summarizes our staff changes in costs. The ones that are highlighted in yellow have to do with special education, and Diane's going to go into that next. And as Diane said, there's always some stuff that's deferred until next year, particularly when you think back of what we think the elementary enrollment's going to do in the next 5 or 6 years. One of those priorities that was deferred off of this year is adding another elementary science teacher, so that makes sense.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the special education budget. So I think I'm going to skip forward here to talk about some of the demands that drove this budget. So one of the things that the school department has identified, well, 4 things that the school department has identified related to the special education program. They've identified an increase in preschool age students who often come with complex special education needs. They've identified an increased need for a therapeutic program, particularly for the elementary school. They've identified a need for increased transitioning program for students 18 to 22 who are either out in work programs or at a community college, staff to help them. And they've also identified the fact that we are seeing an increase in acute mental health issues that require short-term out-of-district placements. So those are 4 areas that the school department has identified within our special education programs. So you can see now going back that there's a slight increase, or there's an increase in residential tuition and day tuition that reflects the need for these short placements. And there is almost always a increase due to our contractual obligations in the transportation budgets, and you see that here as well. I also want to talk just a little bit about why the school department made the decision to take those contractual services and move them to salaried staff. The thinking behind that is that contractual services are often very effective for short-term services or for services that require fewer hours. What they found as they did an analysis of our IEPs, individual education plans for our students with special education needs, that we really now were at a point in the school system where contractual services didn't make as much sense. We now could add those FTE staffing, and that is in speech and language pathology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and reading services that Chris mentioned just a minute ago. So again, I want to just go back. I'm sorry for jumping around here a little bit, but to address these needs, the school department has proposed 1 FTE to support elementary students with these emotional and behavioral challenges, 1 FTE to increase the number of preschool age students with special needs services, and 2 FTE to support the increased cohort of students in the FLEX program who require therapeutic programming. That's the high school program. And then to support kids who are in transitioning age 18 to 22 at their job sites. So that is directly related to the challenges that they have identified. So how do we do? Well, Westwood has a strong commitment to educating our students in our community and in our schools. In fiscal year 20, almost 17% of our students did receive some special education services, but only 0.5% of Westwood's students were educated out of district. So it really just shows the degree to which the administration goes to keep our kids in our community educated here. In line with other comparable communities, the statewide average is 1.1%, and as I said, we're about 0.5%. Capital budget.
Okay. Thank you. Jumping over to capital, as you can see, level funding from fiscal year 20 through fiscal year 21 at $1,017,000. The impacts, if you will, to this, as you can see, constant pretty much across the board with a couple changes that I'll explain. The first being technology and copier decreases reflect some carryover from fiscal year 20, so that explains the difference there, down from 150 to 130,000. The roofing allotment, it's added to from previous years. As you can see, the allocation of $100,000 consistent with previous years. The strategy here is to build up an amount that would support what is a significant cost down the road should it be required. Looking for a vehicle increase, and that's a $60,000 ask for fiscal year 21. And that's to replace a 14-year-old vehicle that's currently on its last legs, if you will. And why the vehicles are needed from a school department standpoint is they travel and do work throughout the various schools, and saving dollars at the end of the day as a result of using our own resources who need transportation to go in and get things done. So it's certainly a prudent expenditure there. Other things, let me just bring them all up here, is the routine approval of Chapter 70 state aid. This is typically released after May's town meeting, but it must be appropriated by town meeting to the school department. An increase in SPED's reserve account, and how the current SPED reserve account is structured is that the request for a town meeting is approval of $350,000. State aid law actually allows for the account to be increased up to $1 million. The account currently stands at around $400,000. The planned expenses total around $300,000. Included in the capital funding is 2 capital projects. We've touched on the security from a position standpoint, but we're looking to continue to upgrade that at a cost of $150,000. And finally, the HVAC project at Thurston with a $150,000 price tag. Yes.
So, in the special education reserve account, the balance currently stands at $400,000. The planned expenses, that's going to be what's going to be charged to the special education reserve account?
That's my understanding.
That's coming out of there. So then it will be $100,000.
Right.
And that's to cover the volatility of.
With expected cost as it incurs, and obviously as part of a capital funding, you're trying to build up some equity to cover yourself for expected costs.
No, right, I just don't, what are the planned expenses that are coming out of a reserve account?
Lemma will.
Let the
We
expert
have the experts behind
Oh,
us.
no, here, Connor has it.
Good question.
So we have.
Introduce yourself, Lemma.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Lema Jean-Baptiste. I'm the Director of Finance and Director of Business and Finance. We do have 2 residential tuitions that we expected and knew that we would need to hit against this account in this particular year. And this is because these are one-time expenses. We don't expect these to be recurring next year. So we had, rather than building them into the operating budget, planned that they would be charged here.
Thank you.
And oftentimes, over the summer, somebody will come into the town and they'll, come to the school in September and they'll say, okay, we want to be residents of the town and want to have our kids educated, but my kid needs special education. We welcome them with open arms, but we didn't plan on that. So that happens all the time.
Yeah, the timing is, you have to share it with the district they've moved from, but if they come from out of state, you're kind of out of luck, so.
I think I have a silly question, and it's for Superintendent Parks. So,
If she can't answer it,
the out-of-district transportation is about $400,000, and obviously the need for special education services has increased, so gone from a contract approach to bringing employees in-house. Is there any merit to, or is it possible to, if you continue to ramp up in town, in the Westwood School District services, would there be an offset or decrease in outside transportation, and then gain some maybe additional benefits to having a larger staff inside?
Not a silly question. Unfortunately, I think the answer is probably no, and I say it for this reason. So Diane referenced before that in Westwood, only about 0.5% of our students are currently in out-of-district placements, which is really fairly remarkable when we look at surrounding communities. And that reflects two things. It reflects our commitment to keep kids in-house, being educated in their community. That's our value. But in addition to that, it's also cost-effective when we can build programs in-house. However, I think there will always be some small portion of students who have unique needs that we can't meet in the district. And we think we've cut that margin about where it's going to be.
Thank you.
And if I could be so bold as to add on to the superintendent's comments, that also accounts for things that pop up unexpectedly. Like a student might be injured in a sporting contest and all of a sudden needs transportation to a unique facility or a hospital or something like that.
And unfortunately, we don't get reimbursed by the state circuit breaker for transportation. Though, is there any talk about that happening?
Yeah, there's good news on that front. So in the law that was recently passed regarding school funding, in fact, they have agreed to start incorporating some reimbursement for special ed transportation into circuit breaker. So that's excellent news, potentially. However, that's going to be a phase-in process, and we don't have all the details yet. So we'll have to see how that unfolds over the next 3 or 4 years.
That's good news. Anything else?
So I do want to just comment on the school building committee, because I have been attending those meetings, and I just can't express to you how impressed I am with the work of the school committee and that subcommittee. So there's no decisions made yet, but the architect has presented some plans. The committee has reviewed them from a site planning perspective, they've set educational priorities, and they've reviewed the plans against the educational priorities they've set, against traffic impact, against the impact on the students during any transitional time when a building would be built. They've looked at things that came up just in the last presentation, fields, gym capacity, things like that for the town, that the town's interested in increasing those services. They've looked at those issues. They've looked at options on both the Hanlon and the Sheehan site. They've looked at options where those schools would be rehabbed and renovated, and additions have been to put on those schools, and then they've looked at building new schools on those sites. They've looked at plans that could accommodate 315 students, 560 students, or 685 students, depending on whether you're combining Hanlon and Sheehan or whether you're combining Hanlon and Deerfield. So they've looked at various options. The architects have put these out for the committees to look at. I don't believe there's any recommendation from the committee yet.
Not yet. We've moved from about 15 design options to a short list of, I think, six or seven.
Yeah, it's just, the work has been amazing. So just to give kudos to them for that. And then just to summarize our report, as you can see, the majority of the increase is in salaries. Those are negotiated salaries. There's not much the school committee can do about those. The increases that they have proposed are very well thought out, and we really appreciate the time and the efforts from Emily and her team as we looked at this.
And just let me build upon that in closing. The tremendous support. They clearly have strong leadership and a committed group that includes the whole school staff and our elected school committee, and would be remiss if we didn't mention that one of those members will be is decided not to run, so I don't know if we call it officially retirement, but
She
Joseph
calls it that.
Joseph Jowdy, who for well over 2 decades,
27 years.
27 years, has decided not to run, so in recognition of all that she did for the schools, as witnessed by all of us, and the cooperation that she's provided this group is much appreciated.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'll open it up to the press, the public, okay? So, new business, what do we have on the agenda for, there's still, okay, so there's still some discussion about the articles. You know, the select board and the planning board meet next week, and we'll have a better idea. Some articles might go away. We know that there's going to be one new article on street acceptance, which we will get information. It's been posted, and all the things have been done properly. So we will have that article. So we'll know better in 2 weeks. Let's see. So we'll take our, when we have the hearing, we'll be hearing on all the financial articles from Pam, but then we'll be discussing, we'll have the, it'll be an open hearing that anybody can come in and discuss any article. So, and then we will vote that night. So it will, that's one reason why we start at 7. It will be a later night. It's a very, very short list of articles, so think a lot about it. We'll discuss it, and we'll vote on those articles. Everybody has their assignments on the articles. You know, we try to keep the write-ups on the articles here, just basically explaining what the article does is in plain English, and then saying our vote. Our vote can be either in support of it, so we want to approve it, or indefinite postponement. Tom, you want to explain indefinite postponement to us?
I would be happy to.
So it's saying that no, we don't, we're not saying no, we're saying we don't want to address it this time. And it's just kind of a formal mechanism they use at town meetings.
Can be
but-
confusing for some.
Yes, it can be. So if we're voting, so when we have we'll explain when we have a motion to vote for something, or you vote indefinite postponement, and we'll make it clear what you're voting for at the time. So the write-ups, I think, you know, Jane has given you the dates for the write-ups for the book. Those are the big things.
I'll resend them tomorrow, so you have them for those writing, but I'll resend those
Okay.
tomorrow.
Is there anything else?
And if you have any questions on indefinite postponement or anything else, you can go to the book that we publish, and it's all there, under the moderator's note page, just to refresh your memories.
Yep, and that's online too, so.
Yes.
I'm sorry, what's the due date for the write-ups?
I'll resend them to you tomorrow. So our meeting is on the 23rd, which is Monday, and then your write-ups are due to me on Thursday.
Those are on the votes, on the
Yes.
write-ups on the subcommittee. Do you want
That's
the-
Howard and,
Yeah.
Diana's already passed in her report, and Howard is working on his.
Okay,
So
so-
that's all done. You meant the write-ups for the articles, right?
Yeah.
He meant what he has to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
That's the
okay,
articles,
yeah. So-
Subcommittees are all set, those
Um,
write-ups.
so I
George
think
said to
that's-
say thank you to everyone, and he said, really nice job on the presentations to the subcommittees. Enormous amount of work was put in by them, so they
Yep.
deserve a lot of credit.
No, and I hope everybody was cooperative. You know, Jane keeps on them to make sure everybody's cooperative and works with us and all, so. And I've heard about the amount of information. Yes,
She
yes.
does a great job,
Oh.
both in organizing it and running herd on me.
Oh, Jane is, she signs her emails Best Jane, and that's her nickname now for me, it's Best Jane. You know, she's awesome.
She gives the adult supervision that we
Yeah, oh, yes, oh, yes. I'll just call up and say, what am I supposed to be doing? And she tells me. Anything else, any questions? Okay. So we don't have any, so I'll have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Okay, adjourn. Oh, all those in favor, sorry.
Aye.
Okay. Bye.
No meeting tomorrow, right?
No meeting.